The night started off innocently enough. My son had invited his best friend over to stay the night, something they had done countless times before. It was routine pizza, video games, and hours of laughter drifting down the hall from my son's room. I didn't think twice about it as I tidied up the kitchen, listening to their muffled voices mixed with the distant hum of the television. The sound of their laughter was comforting, a reminder of how young and carefree they still were. I glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. My body was already heavy with exhaustion from a long day, but I lingered in the living room for a little while longer, scrolling through my phone absent-mindedly. Eventually, the noise upstairs quieted down, signaling that they had either fallen asleep or at least settled into a quieter rhythm. Satisfied, I turned off the lights and made my way to my bedroom, sighing in relief as I slipped beneath the cool sheets. The house was still, wrapped in the familiar comfort of night. I sank into the pillows, letting my breathing slow, feeling the weight of sleep begin to tug at my consciousness. My mind drifted, half dreaming, teetering on the edge of restfulness. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, I felt it. A presence. A shift in the air. My subconscious stirred first, registering that I was no longer alone before my eyes even fluttered open. A strange awareness crawled over my skin, prickling like static electricity. Something wasn't right. Blinking groggily, I turned my head toward the doorway. At first, my sleep-addled mind couldn't process what I was seeing. A silhouette stood in the dim light, motionless, silent. My heart gave a sharp, startled thud. I inhaled deeply, trying to shake off the fog of sleep. "What are you doing?" My voice came out hoarse, uneven. The figure hesitated, then shifted slightly. As my vision adjusted to the darkness, recognition dawned. It was my son's best friend. I pushed myself upright, my pulse still quickened from the initial fright. "Are you okay?" I asked, concern lacing my voice. "What's wrong?" He rubbed the back of his neck, looking suddenly unsure. I couldn't sleep," he admitted, his voice low, almost apologetic. I didn't want to wake him up. I frowned, my mind still sluggish, trying to make sense of the situation. "That doesn't explain why you're standing in my doorway." He shifted again, glancing briefly toward the hallway as if considering leaving. Then, in a quiet voice, he murmured, "I don't know. I just ended up here." Something about the way he said it sent an odd shiver through me. His tone was uncertain, but his body language was tense, conflicted. My instincts told me this wasn't just about not being able to sleep. I sighed, rubbing my temples. "You should go back to bed. You'll regret staying up so late in the morning." For a long moment, he didn't move. His eyes held something unreadable, something searching. I was suddenly hyper-aware of the way he was looking at me. Not quite a child anymore, yet not fully an adult. There was something in the way he hesitated, in the way he lingered, that made my skin prickle with an uneasy awareness. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, good night." He turned and padded back down the hall, disappearing into the shadows. I let out a slow breath, lying back against my pillows, but the restfulness I had felt earlier was gone. My heart was still beating too fast, my skin still tingling with unease. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting. That he was just a restless kid who didn't realize how unsettling it was to stand in someone's doorway in the middle of the night. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't the end of it. Not even close. The rest of the night was restless. Even after my son's best friend had disappeared back into the hallway, the weight of his presence lingered. I kept replaying the moment in my head, questioning whether I had misread it. Maybe it had been nothing. Maybe he had genuinely just been struggling to sleep and ended up in my doorway by accident. But something about the way he had looked at me said otherwise. I forced myself to close my eyes, willing sleep to take over, but it never fully came. My body remained hyper-aware, my thoughts refusing to quiet. The house had returned to its silent state, but inside me, a storm was raging. Then, sometime later, maybe an hour, maybe two, I heard it again. Footsteps. Soft, hesitant, but distinct. Moving down the hallway. I held my breath, my body tensing beneath the sheets. Was he going back to the kitchen? The bathroom? Or... A shadow crossed the threshold of my door. My fingers clenched against the fabric of my blanket as I turned my head slowly, heart pounding. He was back. This time, he didn't just stand there. He took a single step inside, barely visible in the faint glow of the streetlight seeping through the curtains. My stomach tightened. I couldn't sleep, he whispered again, though this time, the excuse felt thin, fragile. I swallowed hard, sitting up just enough to rest on my elbows. You shouldn't be here. He didn't move. Didn't leave. I know. The air in the room felt thick, too heavy, pressing down on me in a way I didn't quite understand. There was something in his posture, uncertainty mixed with something deeper, something restrained. His breath was shaky, his hands clenched at his sides. Go back to bed, I said again, firmer this time. Still, he hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Do you want me to?" The question sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. I opened my mouth to respond, to say yes, but the words felt stuck. I didn't trust my voice, didn't trust the conflicting thoughts racing through my mind. "You're my son's best friend," I reminded him, my voice quieter than I intended. "This is wrong." His gaze didn't waver. If anything, it only grew more intense, searching my face for something, permission, maybe? Or perhaps just a reason to leave. "I know," he said again, softer this time. I don't know why I came back." "I did." I exhaled, my hands gripping the sheets as I tried to steady myself. "You need to leave. Now." For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't. But then, finally, his shoulders slumped slightly, and he nodded. "Good night," he murmured before turning on his heel and slipping back out into the hallway. This time, I waited until I heard the soft click of my son's bedroom door closing before I allowed myself to breathe again. My hands trembled as I pressed them against my temples, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But I couldn't, because deep down, I knew this wasn't just some mistake. Something had shifted, and things would never be the same again. The next morning, I was slow to rise. My sleep had been broken, restless, filled with half-dreams and fragments of whispered words. As I stepped into the kitchen, I could already hear the boys talking in the living room, their voices casual, as if nothing had happened. I lingered by the doorway for a moment, watching them. My son laughed at something his friend said, completely unaware of what had transpired the night before. The sight of it made my stomach twist with unease. His friend glanced up then, as if sensing my presence, and our eyes met. The moment stretched between us, heavy with unspoken things. His expression was unreadable, but there was something there, something quiet, something knowing. I quickly looked away, busying myself with the coffee maker as if I hadn't noticed. But my hands trembled slightly as I poured my cup. The day passed in fragments. The boys eventually went outside, tossing a football back and forth in the yard, their voices drifting in through the open window. I stayed inside, keeping myself busy, avoiding unnecessary interactions. But even as I folded laundry, as I cleaned up the mess in the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that at some point, he would seek me out. And I was right. Later that evening, as my son was in the shower, I turned to find him standing in the hallway again. This time, in the light of day, he looked different. More confident. Less hesitant. I swallowed, gripping the edge of the counter. "You should go home soon." He took a slow step forward. I know. But he didn't move. A silence stretched between us, charged, waiting. "Last night." He started, then stopped. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I wasn't lying. I really couldn't sleep. I nodded stiffly, trying to keep my breathing even. "That doesn't explain why you came back." He gave me a look that made my pulse stutter. "I think you know why." My stomach twisted. "This can happen." "I know," he said again, but the way he was looking at me told me he didn't mean it. And maybe, just maybe, a part of me didn't either. I turned away, forcing myself to focus on the dishes in the sink. "You need to go." For a moment, I thought he might argue. But instead, after a long beat of silence, he sighed. "All right," he murmured, his voice softer this time. "But this isn't over." I didn't turn around until I heard the front door open and close. Only then did I allow myself to exhale, my hands gripping the sink as I tried to steady myself. Because deep down, I knew he was right. This wasn't over. Not even close.